as you heard, we're going to be talking about transportation. First, for those of you who haven't been to the first two presentations, a little bit about the draft scoping plan, which I think has a really lousy name. If any of you thinks anything better, I'd like to hear it. Next. The story begins with the passage of the Climate and Community Investment Act in June of 2019. The CLCPA, which has since been shortened to the Climate Act, had some bold mandates listed on the slide. And I just wanted to make several points. By 2040, we have to have 100% renewable electricity. By 2050, we need to be at net zero carbon emissions. The law didn't specify how to reach the goals, though. That was left up to the Climate Action Council. Next. The CAC has met roughly monthly since March of 2020. Since then, they've determined that the Climate Act goals are feasible. They've convened and received final recommendations from advisory panels representing all sectors of New York's economy. They've now synthesized those recommendations into a single 330-page document, which they've released for public comment. We have until June 10th to make those comments, either in written form or at one of 7 public and 2 virtual hearings to be convened in April and May. The final scoping plan, which incorporates those comments, must be delivered to the legislature and the governor's office by the end of this year. Now, next slide. The scoping plan targets 6 sectors of the New York economy for greenhouse gas reductions. And this slide shows those sectors and the amount each contributes to New York's greenhouse gas problem. Note, 3/4 of the greenhouse gases emitted by New York come from the building, transportation, and power generation sectors alone. Next. Today, we're going to talk about transportation. 28% of New York's greenhouse gas emissions come from this sector, and emissions have gotten worse since 1990. Right now, only 0.5% of the vehicles on the road are electric. There's good news, though. The total cost of ownership of electric vehicles is falling. In 2 to 4 years, electric cars will be cheaper to own than gas-powered cars. By the end of the decade, it's projected that they will cost less to buy. It's also happening with trucks, but more slowly, and we need to speed things up. Next. So the basic answers for transportation aren't hard. Every vehicle in the state has to be electric. We need enough charging capacity to handle them all. To make sure people without cars aren't left behind, we need a major expansion of public transit with special attention to that last mile, getting to your destination from the transit stop. And smart growth along public transit lines will make public transit worth the investment. Next. So how do we get there? Well, we're heading there already. In September, Governor Hochul signed legislation requiring all light-duty vehicles and non-road vehicles sold in New York to be zero emissions by 2035. By 2045, the same will apply to heavy-duty and medium-duty trucks. School buses are targeted to be zero emissions by 2035. To reach our climate goals, we have to make that transition even faster. The scoping plan proposes a lot of incentives to get us there, but the ones I like best are on the slide. The fee bait puts an extra fee on the sale of internal combustion vehicles, and the money subsidizes the purchase of an electric car or truck. The rebate can be progressively structured based on income. Make it easier for electric car manufacturers to sell directly to the consumer. Right now, regulations make it hard. Car dealerships also would rather not sell electric cars since they don't require much maintenance, and maintenance is a car dealer's cash cow. Next. Since we'll need to charge all these vehicles, the state should support the expansion of charging infrastructure. Charging stations should go where they're needed. First, to areas of high demand, like highway rest stops and public parking lots. We should also have them at big box stores, grocery stores, and employer parking lots. Second, people who don't have their own garages need access to charging, so apartment lots should also need chargers. Finally, all that electricity is going to put a big strain on the grid. We need mechanisms to even out the load, like smart charging and even reverse charging at times of peak demand. You can see that on TV commercials already. Clearly, we're going to need a huge infusion of public funds and redirection of incentives to get us there. Next. We'll also need to improve public transportation in a big way. In cities, we need to increase the number of transit stops, the frequency of transit stops, and the number of transit routes. We need affordable fares with seamless payment structures, and we need good ways to get that last mile to your destination. We're talking bike sharing, ride sharing, and also the low-tech stuff, like making sure there are safe walking and bike routes. At this point, I'm going to call out two significant omissions of the scoping plan. First, there are only sketchy plans for improving transit service outside of the New York City area. And second, there are no plans for improving intercity transit service. Next. To make transit service work properly, there need to be destinations you can get to near the transit stop. The scoping plan details ways to incentivize and zone for smart growth, otherwise known as mobility-oriented development. Zone to encourage infill of empty space between areas of sprawl and city centers. Zone for mixed-use commercial, retail, and residential development at transit nodes. Zone for businesses to locate along transit lines and encourage employees to use them to commute. The goal is to make it convenient to live your life with just public transit. The scoping plan does note that because projects like this take so long to develop, the laws and incentives need to be aligned ASAP. We expect this to take several decades to come to fruition. Next. Disadvantaged communities are going to benefit from these changes. The scoping plan specifies rebates and tax incentives on both new and used electric vehicles targeted to low and middle income households. Charging must be available in apartment parking lots and other places that people without garages can use. Decreasing diesel and gas fumes will bring about a big improvement in health for these communities, since they tend to be close to major transportation routes and truck depots. A warning here, though. A provision of the plan is to use renewable biofuels in hard-to-electrify trucks and buses. That would expose folks in frontline communities to all the pollutants we're trying to avoid. Next. The transportation sector already has most of the tools we need to get to net zero. Even this sector could benefit from some R&D though. We could use zero emission aviation and long haul transport. If we can't do it with electrification, research into better hydrogen combustion or fuel cell technology would help. It would also be good to have smart grids that allow variable time and reversible vehicle charging. We need seamless multimodal trip planning and payment options on public transit. And ride scheduling technology for that last mile after you get off public transit would be useful. Next. So if transportation is your interest, we suggest you advocate for the following. Phase out internal combustion vehicles even faster than the new law requires. Push for the progressively structured rebate on gasoline vehicles to subsidize the purchase of electric cars. Push to eliminate the sales tax on all electric vehicles. The state should support the build out of fast charging infrastructure. The state should also incentivize the installation of charging stations in privately owned retail, grocery, and employer parking lots, or for that matter, anywhere cars are likely to be parked for extended periods. Push for utility rate adjustments to encourage EV charging off-peak. Next. While we're at it, we need R&D to allow mass reverse charging of EVs during peak hours. Tell the Climate Action Council that cities other than New York City need good public transit, and we want to see better action plans for those cities. While we're at it, we also want plans for intercity transit. We always want state agency funding to align with scoping plan goals for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. In the case of mobility-oriented development, which is ultimately controlled by municipalities, funding incentives are especially important. Let's advocate for it. And finally, if we can't completely electrify long-haul buses and trucks, we have to keep them out of disadvantaged communities. Their health depends on it.